and welcome to Tullahoma's Cooking. I am your host, Kelly Lepchinsky, and we're recording once again today in my home kitchen while we are under a shelter-at-home order in the state of Tennessee and across the globe, at least across the nation, during the COVID-19 crisis. Now today we are going to continue cooking things that either you may have in your pantry or, in the case of me here today, things I have in my pantry. Instead of making a non-essential trip to the grocery store, we're going to take a look at what I had here and make a savory chicken casserole. Now, one of the things that we'll be doing today is frying chicken. And let me tell you right now, frying foods is not really big on my radar. Now, bread, cheese, beer, I'm all in for those kind of things. Fried foods, that's not really my jam. So if you have a fried chicken recipe that you are familiar with, that you love, go ahead and do that. The fried chicken is just a component of this final dish. And so, we're going to make it happen, but you don't have to follow my recipe for frying chicken. You may have a better one. Now, if you're like me and you don't fry very often and you do need to start from scratch on that, follow along with me. We'll both be on an adventure. Now, first thing I did is, if you've ever defrosted a turkey in the sink, I did that with chicken breast. When I buy chicken, I am never going to use all of the chicken I bought at one time. So I freeze 2 boneless, skinless chicken breasts at a time in a Ziploc bag in my freezer. Then I take them out as I need them to defrost. Now, I wanted to save a little bit of time today, so while they were defrosting, I'd put them in the cold water bath as you would defrost a turkey, and I poured in buttermilk. Now, I don't actually keep buttermilk in my home, but there is a substitute that you can make. For every cup of milk that you would use, every cup of buttermilk that you would use in a recipe, just fill your measuring cup about a tablespoon of vinegar, and then finish the rest of the cup with milk. Now, I don't recommend you drinking that. You will see the acidic reaction when that happens. But in a recipe, it is exactly the substitution you need, because it's that little bit of acidity that breaks down and tenderizes the chicken. Now, the acidity comes from vinegar, so why don't we just marinate our chicken in vinegar? That's too much acidity. That's going to make your chicken seize up. What you want is a nice little bit of tenderizing. I'm going to take this out of the sink here, and you'll see I've actually got 2 of these bags with 2 breasts each, and I've just got them in the buttermilk, nice and defrosted right there, but they're going to be very, very wet when we take them out of here. So let me grab those really quick right now, and we'll move them over here to the oven. And once again, I'm going to bring in my handy dandy makeshift counter so that we can do everything facing forward. Now, most people, when you're making fried chicken, you do a dredge. You do chicken into egg first, and then into flour, and then maybe back and forth once or twice, doesn't matter, before you fry it to get that batter on it. I have never, ever successfully done that. Now, like I said, I don't fry a lot, so I haven't learned all the tips and tricks. So I have gone back all the way to an old family cookbook for a recipe which uses a fritter batter as your breading and puts the egg and flour all in one. So we're going to do that. We're going to make our fritter batter. Now, I've already done preliminary measurements here. What I have here is a cup of flour, and then my seasonings are already in there. I didn't mix them up yet so that I could remember what was in here so I could tell you. I've got the cup of flour, and then just a half a teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of pepper, of garlic powder, and then cayenne, but not the full half a teaspoon on that one. Drop down to a 1/4 teaspoon on the cayenne, unless you just really like flavorful, spicy, Nashville hot chicken. Okay? So we're just going to go ahead and mix all those seasonings and flour up together real quick. But we don't have to do that too carefully, because we also have to add milk and eggs, the other part of what would be the dredge. So we've got 2 eggs here that, as always, I have let come to room temperature. And we're just going to beat those up really quickly. Okay. And then we're going to add in our milk. And this was 2/3 of a cup of milk, which I also let come to room temperature. Not a big deal on the milk, I guess, but always easier, I think, when working with a recipe to have all of your ingredients at room temperature. And then we're just going to pour that right into the flour. There we go. And then we're going to mix that. Now we have, or our way to, a fritter batter. Now this should be, and I've never made this before, I don't make fritters either. Again, I'm going to keep saying it, I'm not a fried food person. But you're going to see it's heavy flour, so it's going to be fairly solid. And the eggs are going to make it fairly binding. Ooh, yeah, we got to do a little more mixing there. All my cayennes in one little corner. Don't want that. I have one very, very hot piece of chicken, and the rest that are kind of like, where's the beef? So to speak. I'm actually going to reach for, as I do, it seems, every single episode, for one of my rubber scrapers, because that whisk is just not getting over into the corners like I need it to. All right, here we go. That's a little bit better. Seeing some of that pepper and that cayenne was just hiding in the corner. I gave it a too quick a little whisk. I said it didn't matter. I was wrong. I went in there with a fork. All right, there we go. So now we have a nice sort of thick, I'm not sure how much you can see there on the camera, but you can see it's somewhat thick egg and flour mixture. And we're just going to be dropping our chicken right on that. Now, as I mentioned, I've got 4 chicken breasts that I have prepared in the buttermilk. They've defrosted in the buttermilk for, it's been, how long ever it took them to defrost, really. And usually, though, if you've got them defrosted, if you were doing that in 2 separate parts, you have defrosted chicken you're going to put in the buttermilk, just let them sit in the buttermilk for about an hour. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to need those again. Let me leave them where I can find them. All right. Now, as I said, these are going to be pretty wet. So I think I'm going to use a paper towel on taking them out of the bag. And when I dredge them, I'm going to do something else. So let's get these out of the bag first so I don't make too sloppy a mess. Now, these should be nice and tenderized by that vinegar. All right. Now, again, we're working with egg and there we go. Little piece of garlic I also threw in there just for some extra flavor. Now we're working with an egg base here. And so, as you know, every time we do a casserole and we're dealing with egg in any way, I don't like to use the metal pan. We're going to be cooking in the glass, but I am going to dredge onto a metal pan. I have a screen here, a piece of parchment paper to catch any of the excess that falls off on a baker's half sheet. All right, and so we're going to go ahead and dip one of these chicken breasts right in here and see what happens. Oh, yeah, that's, oh my goodness, so much more successful than anything I've ever done going from flour to egg to flour. Look at that. That is coating beautifully. Okay. So we're just going to take that and put it over on this baking sheet. And then we'll do the rest of those real quick. Coat in the fritter batter. Now, the thing of this is, as I mentioned earlier, your fried chicken is just a component in the final dish that we're making today. You can see I've got some peppers and some onions out. They're going to be part of this whole casserole dish too. And I already have a bottom layer of some veggies in my casserole dish because I didn't have any celery in the house. But the last time I bought celery, I had some left over. So I chopped it up with some leftover onion and I threw it into the freezer. So I've gone ahead and put that in the bottom of my bowl to have a little bit of celery in this dish as well. If you have fresh celery, even so much the better. But as I mentioned, not doing any non-essential grocery shopping for this. So I use what I have. All right. We actually have quite a bit more of that fritter batter left. And I'm really impressed with that. I have never tried that before. I really, really like it. Once again, I probably should have washed my hands before you saw, let you see that I did that, but I think if you watch these episodes enough, you know that I'm pretty obsessive with the hand washing. All right. And that's pretty thick stuff there. All right, so we've got our egg and flour and our seasonings. We've got them on this rack where we're going to let them drip a little while, and we want to let that set and sort of become one with the chicken. You know what? I don't know the chemistry of this. I know that when I worked at a restaurant in Nashville at the Belmead Plantation, the recipe that Martha's at the Plantation used called for getting your chicken prepared and putting it away in the freezer for anywhere from a half an hour to 3 hours. And that was the best chicken I've ever had in my life. So I don't need to know the why. I know that's what I'm gonna do. This baking sheet, the convenient thing about the restaurant industry is they figured all this stuff out for you. This baking sheet will fit exactly into your refrigerator, and unless you're using a baker's half sheet, you may have a cookie sheet that's even smaller. You should have no problem putting the baker sheet directly in with your dredged chicken, as long as you've taken a moment to clear out some space in the fridge. Now I have done that, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take our coated chicken, put it in the fridge, give it about a half an hour. We'll come back, we'll talk about the oil that we're gonna use. In fact, no, you know what? Let's do that now because I wanna get that heated. And I wanted to show you something. I almost said it again. When I have tried before, I have used home cooking like canola oil, Wesson. This time, because we made bread a couple episodes ago, I had Crisco in the house. Now, I have heard other people who make fried chicken just say Crisco is the absolute best thing to use. I don't know whether they're right. We're going to give it a try. But how much Crisco do you use? Well, the only guideline that I've really found to be consistent is that you want about a half an inch of the bottom of your pan. How do I tell you how to measure out a half an inch? I don't know what pan size you're using. So what I did was, with the heat on, I just put enough Crisco in until it looked about right, but it's too hot to test, to actually put your finger down in and, you know, your attached 1 inch measurement. It looked right. But while I was preparing the rest of this, I turned it off the heat and let it sort of come back to room temperature, at which point Crisco stabilizes. And that means now I have a semi-solid back in my pan, and I can put my finger right down in there. And I'm going to move it around just a little bit to see if I can get something you can see. Not really. But right about there, okay, I've got a little bit of glossiness from that oil that comes to right about there. That's right about a half an inch. So I got the right amount in there. If you've made chicken before, you probably already know what you're doing with that. Me, I've had a really hard time getting the idea of how much oil to use. I usually am covering the entire chicken. I'm getting the impression from this that I usually use too much oil. So there's sort of your rule of thumb, about a half an inch of oil, or in our case, Crisco. We're gonna put these in the fridge, and we'll be back in about a half an hour. And welcome back. Now I have taken our chicken out of the refrigerator. I only gave it a half an hour because I'm trying to fight against the sunset behind me. But I really would recommend giving it a little bit longer time. The Martha's at the Plantation recipe that suggests doing that, again, says 30 minutes to 3 hours. And it says the reason is it'll be a crispier crust when you take it out and when you fry it. Well, in a way, that doesn't matter because, as I mentioned earlier, the chicken is only a component of this dish, but a longer time is probably better. I gave it the absolute minimum. Now, before we go on to actually frying, you want to get ready some additional ingredients that are going to go into your dish. And what I have here are some peppers and onions. Now, I cut my pepper from the lobe, the bottom lobe first, so that you kind of get everything, get around those seeds. Don't worry about those seeds. And then I'll deal with cleaning the rest off that later so that we aren't here all day. And I just get each lobe cut off individually. There you go. And we'll work with several different colors. Now, there's no real taste difference, or none so much as you notice, particularly when cooked. But I do like just the color, the pop of color that comes from using a number of different bell peppers. And as I mentioned, I had bought these and they were in my refrigerator and needed to be used up. And I thought this was a nice, colorful way to use them. So we're going to just get cubes, little, not even 1-inch squares, just little squares of pepper here. And we're going to cut those up and make them ready. Now, they're going to go in that casserole dish when we get to that point. And this one is going to be where I catch my chicken when it comes out of the fryer. So actually, if I were being smart right now, what I would be doing is putting these directly into that casserole dish. And so let's do that. All right, so I need my little handy dandy tool. I don't have that with me today. And we'll get some onion in there as well. So this is what we're working on, just some onion and pepper. And as I mentioned earlier, I put a little bit of celery, just a little bit, because it's what I had frozen in a group of vegetables, into that pan as well. So we're just going to cut up our veggies here. We've got our Crisco up to heat. And let me tell you, that's something we should probably talk about, because if you're a habitual fryer, you probably know this better than I do. Trying to figure out when you've got the heat just right on this pot of oil, for me, this is a bit of a challenge, because you don't want it to smoke. You don't want it to be bubbling or boiling. And I do think I figured out this may have been one of my earlier problems with frying. I think I've been getting my oil too hot, because the recipe tells me to put it over medium to medium high heat, which is where I started. Now, you probably can't see this, but right now, this is where medium is on my oven. I am all the way down to basically medium low. When I went off camera to break, I was using my handy dandy thermometer to try and figure out what the temperature of this oil was. Now, I do have one of those candy thermometers. There's not enough depth here to put in there. I wasn't getting any reading at all. So what I was trying to do, and be very careful, don't do this at home or take it off the heat to do this, because you do not want to start a grease fire on that hot burner. I'm doing it anyway. I put my thermometer right in this hot oil. And right now, because I took my heat back down, it's starting to climb. It's showing me about 330, 334. It's still going up, but it is in the right area now. When I put it in the first time at medium on my oven, it was well over 400 degrees. And that's probably why I usually burn the breading on my chicken before the chicken is done. I really struggle with fried chicken, and I don't make it often. So I think we've got the oil at a place that we want to use it. And when it comes time to actually fry that chicken, I'm gonna have to do that off camera. You'll see the results when we're done, but that sizzling of the oil is gonna pick up entirely too much on a mic that I am wearing on my person. Again, I'm recording at home right now, so these are the challenges we've got to work around. So now that you know, I'm gonna finish cutting up these veggies. I don't think you need to watch that. We've talked about the temperature of the oil before I put the chicken in it. So I think right now we're gonna take another quick break. I'm gonna come back around when all of this will be chopped up, and I will have made a good running attempt on frying my chicken. Now, the other thing I do want to say, if you're frying your chicken, remember, this is the first part of a recipe. It's going to be part of a casserole that goes into the oven for another whole hour. You don't have to actually cook your chicken as long as you would if you were going to sit down and eat it immediately. 8 minutes might be all you ever do to start with, but certainly don't go over 8 minutes for this recipe, because it's going to continue to cook in its second life when we add it with all these veggies. So now I'm going to go try to fry some chicken, and I'll see you right after that. Welcome back to Tullahoma's Cooking, and man, that was a wild ride. Now, I made a decision in the last segment that some of you may have seen as a problem coming. I didn't. I should have known this. The minute I put the chicken into the oil, when I had lowered the temperature, the chicken itself further lowered the temperature of the oil. Now, I forgot about that. We're dealing with a very small amount of oil here. Like I said, about a ½ an inch, maybe up to 3/4 of an inch of oil, which means that you're displacing it with something that is that even at room temperature is hundreds of degrees cooler, and it evens out. It all drops the temperature down. So the first two that I did, Really took, I didn't put a timer on them, but until they got golden brown and cooked most of the way through, chicken is cooked at 165. And as it turned out, I ended up using that guideline. I didn't leave a lot of room for them to continue baking in the next part of this process because I really wasn't sure what I was looking for done on the outside. Now, these guys came out a little bit, you can actually tell it was a fritter batter, and it gave me a good idea for some of that leftover fritter batter, but we'll come back to that hopefully. The first two really took what seemed like a much longer time than the second two. Once I realized the problem with the temperature and I monitored it a little bit better the second time, I did end up bringing my heat back up to that medium mark and checking before I put the chicken in and after I put the chicken in. Those took almost 8 exactly. I mean, they were dead on. The first two were a little bit more difficult, but right now, all of them have hit that cooked all the way through mark. Now, if you know what you're doing, save a little bit of room on that end, get a little bit light of 165. But I've done this before, and as I told you, I've never been good at frying chicken, and it's never ever hurt the final recipe because it's not going to end up dry, and that's part of what we're doing here. Now, if you think about it, the veggies that we cut, the onions, the peppers, we've even got some of that celery that has been defrosting from the freezer. Most of these vegetables are water. So already we're going to get a lot of heat and steam and water as part of this dish. We're also going to be adding, I think the recipe called for about a cup and a half of tomato juice or milk. I decided to go the tomato route. That's the way that I prefer it. And a cup and a half, this was a 14.5 ounce container of tomatoes. That is close enough. It's not quite 2 cups. It's a little more than a cup and a half, but that's going to be fine. Now, sometimes when I make this recipe, and you may want to do this if you're feeding a number of people, I will go ahead, even before battering, you might want to cut these chicken pieces into smaller pieces, bite-sized pieces, to come out at the end of the recipe as something you can just spoon out onto a plate. Or you're going to end up, as we are this time, with 4 solid chicken breasts that you can scoop all the rest of this good stuff out with. So let's just do that. It's a simple build. And I put my tongs right here. I'm not sure how hot they still are, but we've just made a bed of all the vegetables, and I'm just going to put our chicken on top of that bed of vegetables. And one thing you should not expect at the end of this casserole is for the chicken to still be breaded whole. Some of that, through this whole boiling and cooking process, some of that's going to break off and lend some of its flavor to these vegetables. Just expect that. You didn't do anything wrong if you see the breading has come off your chicken. So then here comes a little bit more of that liquid that we were just talking about. It's going to keep us nice and steamy and heated up there right in the oven. The oven's going to heat us up, so I don't know what I was trying to say there. And just spread that around a little bit. This was just a can. I didn't want to give away, free advertisement to a tomato manufacturer, but it's just a can of petite diced tomatoes, and it can get out of the way. And then the last thing I add in is a little oregano and a little basil, because tomato, oregano, basil, the only thing this dish is missing is cheese. Speaking of which, while we took a break, I had a little home delivery. A friend of mine who works at a cheese plant brought me some excess cheese, so we may have to do a cheese episode here soon. Now what I'm doing here, this is just, I think I did a full tablespoon, and I'm not sure if this one was the oregano or the basil. That smells like the basil. But because it's dried, and I buy bulk dried leaves, I just sort of crush them in my hands a little bit just to sort of open them back up and get into that interior. They're holding on to any moisture at all on the inside. Just let them open up just a little bit. So I crush them in my hands and get them going that way. And there you go. Tomato, basil, it doesn't hurt to give them a little stir, kind of get them into that tomato. That's fine. You can do that. And then what we're going to do, we're going to put a cover on this, and then we're going to put it in the oven. See, I just knocked some of the breading off right there. For 325, and we're going to cook it for an hour. Now, while that's in the oven, when I come back, I should have a pot of rice ready to go. because what we do when this comes out, we're going to just put a breast and a bunch of the stuff right over a bed of rice, and it should be gorgeous. So we will see you after this has had an hour in the oven with the cover on. All right, we'll see you then. Be right back. And welcome back to Tullahoma's Cooking. We are at the end of this dish. Now, while we were waiting for the hour for this to cook, and we really should take the lid off and let it breathe a little bit before, before we plate it. But yeah, while we were waiting for that to cook, as you can tell, probably can see that steam. It's good and done. I went ahead and made some rice. Now, I'm going to assume that you probably know how to make rice, but just in case, boil twice the amount of water actually boil the amount of water that you want your final product to be and half the amount of rice. That's probably the better way to say it. So I wanted to end up with 2 cups of rice so I could have leftovers for some of this. So I used 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice, got it to boiling. As soon as it was boiling, throw the lid on, take it down to low temp, and let the steam actually do the cooking. About 20 minutes, good to go. So we've got our nice rice here. We've got our chicken dish with all of the vegetables and the tomato and the oregano. So we're gonna go ahead and plate one of these guys. Okay, here comes one of the breasts right there on the rice. And get some of those, oh yeah, get some of those veggies from the bottom there. And we got some peppers and onions and good stuff right there. I hope you can see that. It's going to be very, very good. Now, one thing I told you I wanted to come back to, I gave it a test before I said anything for sure, but we had leftover fritter batter. Now, I don't know if you noticed behind me, there were some green apples. I figured we have a good reason, well, we have hot oil anyway and fritter batter anyway. Why not go ahead and make some hot apple fritters? And I do mean hot. Remember, we had some cayenne in that dredge, in that fritter batter. Now, I did go ahead and add about 2 teaspoons of sugar to make it a little more of a sweet batter since we're making more of a dessert product. And I threw these in with the oil at about 375. I'll admit I had a hard time, again, regulating that oven, that oil temperature. But look what we got. I just took some, I didn't even peel them. I just cut them up into bite-sized pieces, covered them in that fritter batter until I used all the fritter batter, so it took about 3 apples, and just plunked them in the water until they were good and golden brown, flipped them over, and then dusted them with a little bit of confectioner sugar, powdered sugar, and we also have some of that bourbon sauce left over from when we made our bread pudding. So you could put that on there as well if you really want to, or instead, if you really want to be decadent. So if you've been following along, you already have some of these things in your kitchen. So there you have it. We have a chicken breast with peppers and onions that's been in the oven for about an hour, and we've got dessert to come back to. That's your savory chicken and evidently apple fritters. Thank you so much for joining me.